and then we will get started. All right. Okay. Welcome to the Resilience series. This is a series of interviews I'm doing for my upcoming book, The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, the follow-up to my book, The Migraine Relief Plan. I'm Stephanie Weaver, and I'm excited to welcome today's guest, Kathy O'Shea. Kathy's the author of Much More Than a Headache, Understanding Migraine Through Literature, and she's a professor in the English Philosophy Department at Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, where she teaches courses in humanities, literature, and composition. And she's also a migraine sufferer. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you. So tell us a little bit about your background with migraine as well as your book.
Sure. I had my first migraine when I was 14, and I remember very vividly the experience. One tends to, I think, maybe. It's still a visceral experience for me to go back and relive it. I was camping with my family, and my brother and I were watching a silent Charlie Chaplin film, actually, believe it or not, in a recreational hall. And I just suddenly got hit by something. I had no idea where it had come from, and I had no idea how I was going to live through. And it was very sudden, not like they tend to be for me now, but my brother had to help me back to our campground, our camper, and my parents back at that time, you know, this was back in the 70s, were helpless. They didn't know what to do for me. They didn't know how to help me, nor did the doctors, you know, when I started getting initial treatment. And so it was a very difficult time. And my parents, to this day, remain, you know, my top supporters and helpers through this long, lifelong journey.
Yes. So, and I think that experience is similar to a lot of people of that first one is memorable. It's kind of a bolt of lightning. For me, they were not quite that severe, and I did not have aura, or it was really more the one-sided headache that came on with weather changes. So I wasn't actually diagnosed until I was 53 years old.
Wow.
So I went my almost entire adult life, you know, kind of with a patchwork quilt of the wrong medications, and not really understanding that this was what was happening, because my thinking about migraine was, oh, it was that person I used to work with who would get so nauseous she would have to be home for 3 days from work and in a dark room, and that wasn't my story, so I had no idea that I was having migraine.
Right. And mine was over one eye too, and it's always remained over the right eye. And so it was, and I too, I was similar to you, that I wasn't diagnosed for a long time. In fact, I was told I had encephalitis and that I could, you know, have to go through major brain surgery. And, you know, my parents went through such a difficult time, you know, trying to work through doctors and medications, and, you know, a plethora of medications that made you ill in various ways. And so I really couldn't even tell you when I was correctly diagnosed, eventually.
Yeah. So tell us about your book. Where did you, how did it start? What prompted you to collect these essays into a book? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I, you know, as you mentioned, I teach literature and humanities. And so I teach poetry, drama, fiction, creative nonfiction. And I was in the middle of about almost 4 years ago now, in the middle of an intractable migraine that had gone on for more than 2 months. And I had my headache specialist, who was phenomenal. He has reviewed the book, and he is a big part of, I dedicated the book to him actually, and he'd been my headache specialist for 16 years, and he had recently retired. And so I was lost. I was absolutely lost. I felt so alone. I felt so just plain isolated and alone and frightened, and I had no way out. Everything I'd ever tried to work didn't work, and I had nowhere else to go. And there was something inside me, and I can remember exactly where I was. It was in the English department at my college, and I thought to myself, I've got to do something positive with this force, this I wouldn't call it a companion in my life, because it's part of me. It's part of who I am, and has been for 40 some years. But I have to do something positive with it that's going to bring me and others, I hope, something that's beneficial out of this experience. So I remember that weekend having a conversation with my husband, who was also an English professor, at the top of a restaurant, and saying, I just have this idea. You know, why couldn't I bring, there's got to be literature, like real literature out there by celebrated authors that are migraineurs. With 39 million migraineurs, there have to be some celebrated writers. So that was what prompted the, my initial interest in starting the book. I didn't think it'd be a book at that point. I just had an interest in researching, and then research led to research, which led to research, and more fascination and passion. I mean, a passion developed that I hadn't felt for anything in a really long time.
That's so awesome. And I also can relate so much to it, because my book started not because I thought I was going to write a book, but because I ordered every book that was on Amazon, basically read them. They weren't that helpful.
Right.
And, and I just kind of started piecing together from my background within public health and curriculum development, being a food blogger. It's like, well, let me try to figure out how to make sense of all of these recommendations that are all over the place. And, eventually came to start feeling significantly better, which is, it's not necessarily, and I'm an N of 1, so I know enough about science that's not, a guarantee that's going to help anyone else. So then I ran 2 groups of people through this 8-week program, and I did really feel the same sort of passion, like this is my mission right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Is to try to help others in whatever way I can. I have these specific gifts. You have specific gifts.
Right.
And there is something about, I think there is something so helpful, whatever our set of gifts are, is figuring out how can we put those gifts in service of others. And that also does help reduce pain. There's a lot of studies about that. And so kind of tapping into that, which is why I was interested to talk to you. So the essays, tell us how the farthest back in time the essays are from and to the present, right? Because they span quite a few years, right?
They sure do. I have a poem back from medieval period called on headache, and it's a amazing poem, and it probably captures the experience of migraine as well as anything written today. Then I have I have Jane Austen. I even, was a migrainer, and I have a poem of hers there. I have one of the poets I found in the 1800s was Jane Winscombe. And it's hard to get a hold of her poems, but it was interesting, really fascinating for me to read about the different strategies, of course, that were used to try to treat headache at that time. And also the way, as we all know, women have been stigmatized and treated as, sort of frail, and it's sort of the headache, and then treated with a headache cure and all of that as being sort of a form of, just, irrationality, and just sort of, the woman's problem, the headache. And so then we come all the way up through even Michael Cunningham's The Hours, which, based on Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. And I have a piece by Virginia Woolf in there as well, an excerpt of her great work called On Illness. And then couple seminal works for me were really, when I was in graduate school, I was in my first semester in graduate school, and I was thrown into teaching a freshman composition class. Never had any training in teaching, I was, because I'd been a literature major, but I was thrown into teaching a freshman comp class, and I was given the book that I was going to be using. Okay. And the very first essay I opened up to in that book was the you know, the definitive text on, you know, migraine really in literature, which is Joan Didion's In Bed. And when I read that, I sobbed. I was in my, you know, graduate dorm apartment, and I remember just sobbing because I thought, wow, this person gets it. I mean, this person gets, I mean, I get chills just thinking of it now. And I thought, I have to have this work in my book. And so it's actually one of the two kind of framing pieces of the book, kind of a bookend, because it captures all 5 themes that are in the book, as does.
And what are the 5 themes?
The 5 themes are the experience itself, but then I break that down into the kind of prodrome phase, the warnings that each of us gets that are different from one another, the experience of the, you know, the headache itself, the migraine itself, and then the hangover, or, you know, however we want to term it, but we all know what that means to us. And I break it down into literature, whether it's fiction, drama, poetry, essays, on in each of those areas that address each of those areas. And then that's the first chapter. The second chapter is the invisibility of migraine. You know, as we all know, like so much chronic illness, it's an invisible disease, and we all suffer for that in many ways. So all the literature in that chapter focuses on it being so invisible. The third chapter is, it's just a headache ? Because we know it's so much more than everybody thinks. You know, can I give you a couple of Excedrin or Tylenol? And which is one of the worst things, of course, anybody can say to us, but even though they're well-meaning, but it's so much more than that. As we all know, it affects the whole mind and body and spirit and emotion, you know, psychological part of our beings. And so the literature explores that in that chapter. Then the fourth chapter is called, it's a full-time lifelong job. And that is literature that focuses on the fact that there is no cure. We have a lot of great new medications out there. We have a lot of great new treatments out there, but there's so much involved in treating our migraine and coping with our migraine. There's so many different avenues each of us has to take, and so many different support systems and so on that we need to have. So many things we've tried and have failed, and we keep trying, you know, new things. And then the last chapter is called When It's Gone. And that speaks to the hangover feeling we get, but also the fear that we have that wonderful, some of us get that wonderful euphoric moment when it lifts. I call it a lift, because for me, it feels like it lifts from the body and every part of me. And you get that euphoric moment where everything, you can appreciate the moment of everything more, I think, acutely than the average person. But then your very next thought is, how much time do I have?
Right.
You know, the fear, like, you know, I gotta get everything done I can now because I don't know when it's coming back.
Yes.
And so many people don't understand that. You know, how could they? I mean, so those are the 5 chapters.
Yeah. So what did you learn about resilience in reading and curating these essays?
Yeah, I think I learned that, first of all, like I knew with literature, what I turn to in times of need and struggle and trying to cope with something that's magnanimous, that's bigger, you know, than I can handle and overwhelming, is literature. Because, you know, whether it's through grief or whatever it is that I'm experiencing, or illness, I turn to that because, you know, literature teaches us that we're not alone. I mean, that we realize through others and the beautiful writing of others that, wow, they do get it. You know, there are other people that really are going through what I'm going through, when you feel like nobody possibly can. And I think that anybody who suffers from migraine knows that there are constant stumbling blocks. There are constant challenges we face, that, you know, you think you're onto the right medication, and that, yes, that works for a period, and then all of a sudden it doesn't, you know.
Right.
And then where do you turn? I think I learned that there's a way to find a way to flourish and to have passion, as you were mentioning, despite this disease that's a part of who I am and always will be a part of who I am. And, you know, it's a significant part of who I am. And I had, you know, I had to come to terms and recognize that but realize that I can do things that are promising and, like you mentioned, beneficial to others, I hope, through that. You know, it's not a personal quest in a sense, you know. I'll be totally honest with you. You've probably run into this too. You know, I'm in the beginning stages of trying to get the book out there, you know, to get people that need it, that can benefit from it, to know about its existence. And the problem is, any place I turn, they say, you know, we don't want any self-promotion. And I can see why it comes across that way, but it's like, how do we let the people know that need this, that might need it or might be able to benefit from it, that it's even available if we don't get it, you know, out there somehow. So it's not, you know, and I think, like you were mentioning too, with your same situation, once that passion took over, and the passion for the project, the passion to deliver something that would help others as well as myself, then that was the driving force. It was the journey, you know, of doing it, that meant as much as anything.
That's great. And so you may have already answered this, but my next question was, well, how does making art or writing play into your own wellness journey, and how, and have you seen that for others as well?
Yeah, I know throughout, you know, I teach humanities courses and all the arts, and I tell my students all the time that that's what the arts do for us, you know, that they bring us well-being, not necessarily through all beauty and joy and all of that, but rather through reality, you know, truth. They are a form of truth that we don't otherwise get. And they can speak to us in ways that other, you know, more objective clinical kinds of, you know, books and literature cannot.
Right.
And I think that for me, so literature's always been a part of my, you know, search for well-being and my process of well-being. But in doing this project, I mean, it's been a lifesaver, you know, when I could dig into this and leave everything else behind. And you know this, everything else goes away and you're just completely absorbed, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, if you're watching this and you don't feel like, oh, well, I'm not an artist, I'm not a writer, I don't have that. It's really finding that sense of purpose, whether
Yes.
that's somehow focusing on things that make you joyful, being of
Yeah.
service to others, finding beauty in around you, a sense of mindfulness, like when you're cutting vegetables, just looking at how beautiful the vegetables are. So there's lots of ways. You don't have to be a writer or an artist to benefit from this.
I'm
But
glad you mentioned that.
yeah, but certainly, you know, clearly reading a book of essays from just a variety of writers that echo our experience. I think one of the things that I'm excited about this time in humanity, even though there's a lot of really negative things happening, is that so many people have found their voices and are speaking their truth. And I think that's so powerful and empowering.
It is.
So my last question for you is, what are some self-care strategies that you personally find most helpful besides the art writing?
Yeah, sure. Because if I could just pick up for a second on what you said,
Sure,
I totally agree with you. It's, you know, for me, that happens to be what it is, but for any of us, you know, whether it's gardening, you know, enjoying your flowers, or being able to somehow, one of my favorite poets, she's not in my book, but because she didn't happen to write on this subject, but she's deceased only a couple of years, is Mary Oliver, and she focuses a lot on nature and outdoors, but also on mindfulness and paying attention.
Yes.
And being aware of, you know, what's there in the present rather than focusing on the past and the future. And I think that's so vital for those of us suffering with it, you know, with this disease. I think that even if you can do that for moments, you know, because I really believe life is made up of moments, you know, and so finding what it is that gives you that purpose, I think, as you mentioned, is just what's critical, whatever that might be. But my own ways yeah, it's a very good question. Walking my dogs. You know, I have 2 golden retrievers that are certified pet therapy dogs, and I actually, they're at my college, they're the official therapy dogs.
Aww.
When we're face to face, but of course we're not right now.
Right.
But that brings me great well-being, because it is a service to others. They are doing the service to others, and I couldn't begin to tell you the benefits of that for me in terms of my own well-being. But just being in nature, being outside, hiking, that kind of thing is huge for me. Gardening, my husband and I are big flower gardeners in particular. And finding different ways of connecting with those people I love, having a wonderful support system. I think that's so critical. I've been blessed with that all my life, you know, and, you know, I think that if we can, each of us can find that in our own way, we will be, you know, we will feel so much better cared for and better understood. And I think that's so important.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy O'Shea, the author of So Much More Than a Headache, Understanding Migraine Through Literature. You can check out the link in the comments if you're watching this on Facebook. And you can find it everywhere books are sold. So please do go check it out. Come back soon to see another episode of the Resilience series, and look for my book, The Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, in the spring of 2022. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, perfect.
Great.